Well, welcome. Nice to see you. I'm excited to share this information. This has been a passion of mine for a long time. I've been practicing yoga for about 28 years. I've been a personal trainer with ACE since 1998. And in that process, I also own a yoga and fitness boutique studio in Hood River, Oregon, where we have mostly yoga, but we do have some strength classes as well. And I've been training teachers for about 20 years as well in yoga and some fitness stuff too. And what I found over the years when I was doing my yoga training was that back in the day, there wasn't a lot of training on biomechanics or human movement mechanics. There was some anatomy training. And the more that I learned from some really great people, the more I realized that there are people getting injured in yoga, unfortunately, but all movement, right? In any movement, we can become injured. And sometimes that injury is not a result directly of the movement, but it might be something that's already been there that gets exacerbated. But the statistics show that injury is on the rise in yoga. And I think it's partially because there are just so many people doing yoga. But this webinar is not a time where we're going to talk about this as like a scary thing, because yoga has so many amazing benefits. And with just a little bit of basic understanding, we can truly help reduce the likelihood of injury in movement in general. And this is something that I think actually we should all learn in like middle school. It's so funny that we learn so much about science on, about rocks or salmon but we don't learn the science of our bodies, and our bodies we live in every day of our life. So why don't we learn how tissues get injured and how we can help prevent orthopedic injury? By the time, I'm also an orthopedic exercise specialist through ACE. By the time we are 30% of us have an orthopedic injury that we may or may not be aware of. So orthopedic injury is, can be a part of the wear and tear of life as well. But all movement is good unless we do too much, too soon, or too often. So we're going to talk about just 5 basic ways in yoga, in life, in any movement that we can help reduce the likelihood of injury. So I'm going to go ahead and flip us forward to the next slide. So these are the things we're going to talk about. 5 ways to reduce the likelihood of injury. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Safe Yoga program and what we offer. And then I'm going to open it up to any questions you might have about certain poses or movements related to what we talked about. So you can start to think about that if there's a specific question that you have, and you can put that in the chat at any time, and we'll review that when we get to the end for the Q&A. And then the next thing that you can put in the chat if you like, and we're going to share these notes with you, is I would love to know, for those of you who are here, do you practice or teach yoga? And if not, what other forms of movement or exercise do you enjoy? So I can kind of tailor our talk a little bit toward what you do and make sure that I address things that are more relevant to what you do. So just take a moment to think about that. And if you have any, and then again, the second thing is if you have any movements or exercises or poses that you are wanting to know about specifically. Someone said walking. I teach yoga and practice. Excellent. Walking is such a good form of movement. I teach yoga to cancer survivors. Yeah. I actually wrote a book called Yoga and Cancer. All right, excellent. So good to know. Okay, if anybody else has anything to add, just feel free to add it at any time. So let's talk next about the 5 simple ways we can reduce the likelihood of yoga injury. So for those of you who practice yoga, we are given in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which were written about 500 BC, we are given one specific guideline for asana. And asana, if you're not familiar with that word, asana is we think of it in the West and we talk about it as a pose, but when you go deeper into the Sanskrit root of this word asana, it means a good space, to be grounded in a good space. For our purposes today, we'll talk about it as poses or postures or the physical practice of yoga. But Patanjali's Yoga Sutra teaches us that sthira, sukham, asanam, sthira, that yoga posture should be practiced with stability, steadiness, and strength, grounded in that good space, with comfort, ease, and even joy. Sukham gets translated to comfort, ease, and joy, or this good space idea. So asana is more than the physical. It is knowing that when we are practicing, we are continually checking in to see, am I at that place of active calm? Am I supporting my connective tissue with strength and stability? Because gravity is always acting on our bodies, right? And how do I feel? Am I really struggling to be in this place? Is this too much too soon? Or is this something that I'm practicing too often? Or is this just right for me right now? So it's not that, I mean, there's different ways to practice yoga, of course, like restorative yoga is a more meditative practice. But generally, we are given this guideline that can help us create mindfulness, awareness, and support all of these other guidelines. And so continually coming back to this has been huge for me in my practice and for my students. The second thing that is important is progression. So with all yoga postures and movements, and all movement in general, if you start with less range of motion, you're going to be able to, usually that's going to have less load on the tissues. It's also going to allow people to warm into more range of motion. So we're going to talk about that and specifically how that relates to exercise and movement. I'm going to give you some examples of that. But always think about, whenever you're looking at a pose that someone is struggling with, how could I, or a movement, how could I start this with less range of motion? Oftentimes when I'm teaching, I will start teaching something with a smaller range of motion and move into bigger range of motion, and then notice who's struggling and where how I can bring them back to the range of motion that really works for their body. The third thing, vary the load. So if you want to avoid doing too much too soon, or again, repetitive stress injury, cumulative stress injury too often, then looking at how you can vary the load on those tissues is really important. And we're going to talk about different ways to do that. The fourth thing is awareness. I always say advanced yoga is not advanced asana. Advanced yoga is advanced awareness. So while we're practicing any movement, cultivating kinesthetic awareness and neuromuscular coordination, realizing that takes time and practice. Patience and process, this is related to that. Yoga is a process-oriented practice, not a goal-oriented approach. So really making sure that we don't focus on ego and temptation and instead focus on the process. And we're going to talk about examples of that as well. So let's start. I'm going to move back to my mat so that you can kind of see some of what I'm going to talk about in terms of practical examples for these. So we're going to start thinking about number 2, progression and range of motion. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing for a moment so you can see my full screen. All right, okay. So for number 2, progression and range of motion. So when we're teaching poses, thinking about how to vary the range of motion. For example, I had a couple people in this last year who came to one of my classes who had some pretty severe low back pain. And they had tried yoga before and they're like, yoga's not for me, I can't do yoga. And I was like, anyone can do yoga. I really firmly believe that, as long as your teacher understands these 5 principles. So these people particularly could not hinge from their hips, like hardly at all. And if you can't hinge from your hips, it's going to be very hard to practice yoga if you don't know how to modify. So for example, any sort of chair pose was painful for their low back. So if you were going to come into a normal chair where a lot of people would be, for them, there was pain in their back. So when I gave them the permission and encouraged them to just simply move small range of motion as much as they can today, this was their chair, right? So this can be your chair. This can be your warrior too, right? Taking that range of motion that you might normally be in and walking that back foot toward the front foot. I used to go over all of these alignment details in the warriors. Now my alignment detail is really simple. I ask people as they come into warrior two to check in with their pelvis. Is it feeling level and balanced and supported? Are you feeling that steady, stable, and strong feeling with comfort, ease, and joy in your hips, knees, ankles, low back? If not, simply walk your back foot closer to your front foot until you are. So decreasing that range of motion, which also is decreasing stress on the SI joint, the pelvis, the hips, the knees, the ankles, because as we'll come to talk about in the next thing, we're decreasing the load on those joints because we've given a more stable foundation with less range of motion. So really just thinking about all the ways you can reduce range of motion if someone's struggling. So with warriors, low back, hips, SI joint can be an issue, or any of these side facing poses. So if you decrease the range of motion, you can help everybody be successful in a warrior, even if the warrior is here, right? Whatever is comfortable for their SI joint, their low back, their pelvis, etc. Another example of range of motion is the arms. So a lot of people are coming to yoga with rotator cuff issues, right? So when they reach their arms out or up above shoulder level, some people are going to have pain. And one of the most friendly ways to reach your arms is to a 45-degree angle. There's less impingement happening there. But the other option is just not to reach as high. So if you're in say a side angle pose, and everybody's here, well, for a lot of people, that's not going to be comfortable. So I can decrease my range of motion. I could be here, 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 right? Anywhere along that continuum. The arms don't always have to reach up in yoga. They can reach out, they can reach back and down, and varying that is good for your tissue because we do a lot of forward moving in yoga with our arms. We need that back and down movement too. We need strength in the back side of the body, not just the front side of the body, not just our pushing muscles, but also our pulling muscles back and down. So just thinking about where in my continuum, and I have my students kind of explore sometimes, am I going to feel pain-free range of motion? So the idea here is establishing a pain-free and strain-free range of motion, which supports our first principle, Sthira Sukham Asana. All right. The third thing we're going to talk about is load. So when it comes to load, I have a few examples. So load is the force on the tissues related to gravity, or usually it's related to gravity with yoga, but if you were doing resistance training, it could be related to an external resistance, right? A band, a weight, whatever your body weighs. But usually in yoga, it's gravity and body weight. So a couple examples of how we could decrease the load. So if somebody is not yet developed the strength for a full plank or a chaturanga or any of those kind of movements, how could we, and I'm sure you all know this, how could we in a plank decrease our load? Well, when we take the knees down, we're decreasing the load by about half in the upper body. So we've just taken and we provided some external support, right? This is more internal support, more core strength. This is more external support. So you have a choice of how you support the body in different poses, internally or externally. And if somebody's newer to the practice, or if somebody is struggling with something specific in the body, giving them some external support, some more external support can be a great way to reduce the load and make the pose more accessible to more people. So plank is a perfect example. Taking those knees down reduces the load by about half. Another good example is forward fold or half forward fold. So half forward fold can be a very strong or a very relaxing pose. And I usually teach it with blocks. So when we come into our forward fold, we can provide some external support with these blocks. Now, if I'm going to come into half forward fold, I usually start people bending their knees, taking fingertips to the blocks and lengthening the spine. Now, fingertip grip is not enough support. If I'm feeling any strain on my back, I can bring my forearms to my thighs and provide more external support. So now reduce the load on my back because I've provided external stability. Now, if I take these arms away, I'm going to demand more internal stability. So maybe I bring my arms back and down. Now my core has to work a lot more. So I'm creating more internal stability, which usually means core strength, right? So external stability, internal stability. In any pose, think about that. So if I come into a lunge, my blocks are providing external stability. If I take the knee down, I've got more external stability, right? So you can keep adding more external stability for people who need it. And then for the people who want to challenge themselves for more strength, especially core strength, could lift that knee, could lift those arms, right? And then if I wanted to add more range of motion, I might reach those arms further, but that's going to increase the lever length, which is going to increase the load on the low back. So you want to be really smart about that. How much load are we bringing into the tissues by how we're placing our body in different positions? So remember the concept of external and internal support. That's important. Now think about when you're in those poses, like where am I externally supporting myself and where am I internally supporting myself? Okay, one more example. Even in a lunge, you might externally support yourself putting your belly on your thigh. If I lift my belly from my thigh, I've got to activate more strength than if I rest my belly on my thigh. There's all these points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points of grounding support. If I remove one, if I remove my belly, if I come to fingertips, less support. If I bring my arms back, less support. And we just can go on and on in terms of how much support we remove or add. And I don't speak about it in terms of modifications. I don't use that word in my class because I don't want anybody to feel like they are doing something less than someone else. So the language I might use is, do you want more support, right? Do you want more challenge? Do you want more support? So that people can really choose something that's right for their body without getting the ego involved. All right, the fourth thing is awareness. And this relates to a lot of what we've been talking about so far, but awareness develops with practice. Mindfulness awareness, kinesthetic awareness, neuromuscular coordination. So my first yoga teacher, when I came into Down Dog the first time, she said to all of us, this was like a beginner class where she was going over the details of the poses. She said to all of us, you'll be learning Down Dog for the rest of your life. And I thought, what? It's not that simple, right? I mean, it's not that complex. And now I know she's right. Like every time I get into Down Dog, I'm like, what am I learning about my body right now? What do I feel? How do my shoulders feel? How do my hamstrings feel? How do my calves feel? Like every time it's a new experience. And when we start to help people to be in the poses without relying on sort of this didactic alignment that tells you exactly what you're supposed to do, but we start to offer them cues of awareness, and we start to offer ourselves, if you're a yoga practitioner, cues of awareness, or any movement you do, like if you're doing a strength training class, what are you noticing when you step into that side lunge? You know, what are you noticing when you start to really pay attention? You might notice you're going to learn a lot more about the mechanics of your body. So once I started to really trust myself a little bit more and pay attention, I started to learn some things. And then what's beautiful about that is then those things got confirmed through education. So one of the things I started to learn early on is about twisting. Like I have longer legs, shorter torso, and I would come into a twist. Let me just sit on the block for a moment. And as I would come into a twist, I would feel like I wasn't able to twist that far from my waist. Well, then I learned that your lumbar spine only has 3 to 18 degrees of rotation. That is a very, very small amount of rotation. If my belly button is here, 3 degrees is like that. 18 is maybe like that. Very, very small amount of rotation. However, there's so many poses and movements that we do where you might pull with your arms and emphasize that lumbar rotation. Well, what I've learned is that the thoracic spine, which is the spine that attaches to your rib cage, 12 vertebra from about here to here, your thoracic spine has up to 60 degrees of rotation. So if I initiate my twist from my waist and lumbar spine, but I complete my twist through my thoracic spine by using the strength of the muscles that attach to my shoulder blades, my scapula, so like bringing the back shoulder blade in and the front shoulder blade forward, I can twist a lot more without stressing or straining my lumbar spine. So a lot of people, when they come into twist, they're like pulling into their lumbar, and they're not really activating strength and flexibility in their thoracic spine. And we need more thoracic mobility. We really do. Like everybody needs more thoracic mobility. Most people need less lumbar mobility, more lumbar stability, and more thoracic mobility. So when I emphasize thoracic spine into my twists, and this is just something that has come to me through awareness and then education, I'm able to come into a deeper and stronger twist that strengthens my waist, my upper back muscles, right? That's just an example of how cultivating awareness and then deciding like, where am I moving from? There's research that shows that when we know which muscles are moving our body, we actually can activate and coordinate those muscles better. So this is one thing that we really teach in the SAFE training. It's like, what are your muscles that are moving you into poses? Like, what joint actions are happening when I do spinal rotation? What muscles are moving that? And how does that relate to gravity? Sometimes gravity changes the primary muscles that move you. Oftentimes it does, whether we're like moving eccentrically or concentrically. And that's beyond the scope of this webinar, but we do go over it in depth in the SAFE training. The other thing awareness can help us to understand is, do I feel pain or intensity? So a lot of people, when they come to something new, the research says that it takes 3 to 6 weeks to become neuromuscular coordinated to any new form of movement. So how often do we think we're fit? Maybe we walk, we run, we lift weights, we do yoga, whatever you do, Pilates, but then we go do something new and we think, oh my gosh, I'm not in shape. Well, it's not that you're not in shape. It's just that your body is learning how to use different muscle fibers, how to be coordinated in a different way. And so I always tell my new students, I say, it takes 3 to 6 weeks to become neuromuscular coordinated to something new. So be graceful with yourself. Know that you might feel awkward. It might feel hard. But if you stick with it for those 3 to 6 weeks, it's going to feel easier. It's going to feel better. You're going to love it. And this is what happens really for everyone. Especially when we give them these choices of range of motion, varying the load, really speaking to them from a place of awareness instead of like, this is the way to do it, honoring their body. The last thing, before we open it up to 2 more things. The last of the 5 is process orientation. So process orientation relates to everything we've talked about so far, but yoga is awareness orientation. Any mindful movement is awareness orientation and process orientation. So process orientation means that we want to progress with patience into different movements. So this goes back to range of motion and load, but it also comes back to thinking like, if I'm going to do a wheel pose, for those of you who don't know, is a full back bend. And in wheel pose, you have incredible degrees of shoulder flexion and hip extension and wrist extension. So these are all joint actions. So in order to prepare my body for that, I need to come into poses that do those joint actions, but with less range of motion and load before I come right into a wheel pose. So if I wanted to teach wheel in one of my classes, then I would probably prepare my students over a month or two, and then give lots of options, right? In those specific joint action ways. So for example, this is shoulder flexion. So we think about if I'm coming into wheel, I'm going to be doing way beyond 180 degrees of shoulder flexion. Well, the average person walking down the street has 150 degrees of shoulder flexion, not even 180, which is what we typically do in downward dog. So if I don't have a downward dog that feels really good for me yet, wheel is not going to be something that's going to be good for my body to attempt. You know, I need to, it's like, you know, we need to, it's like trying to go to the prom when you're in 6th grade. You know, we need to be able to take our time to develop the range of motion and the mobility. So the word mobility means strength and flexibility, not just the flexibility, but the strength and the flexibility to be able to come into those poses in a way that's not going to injure our joints or tissues. Our tissues can become stronger throughout our lifetime. And if we, you know, we can get into situations where we have osteoporosis, or we have, you know, arthritis, or we've worn out the labrum or the meniscus in some of our joints. We have inflammation, and that's really where we want to honor the range of motion and the load. But if those aren't the situations, if we don't have the mobility yet, there's possibility that we can find these other poses if we choose. You know, for me, it's no longer that important to do all those extreme poses. I really do what feels most balancing for my body. But some people do want to practice more of those, what would be considered mobility extreme poses. And if they do, one thing that we really emphasize in the SAFE training is to respect the risks. So what are the risks with this pose? How do you prepare for this pose? And, you know, to honor the tradition, but to respect the risks that come along with some of those poses is really important. So think about, you know, downward facing dog before handstand, downward facing dog before wheel. Like having a strong down dog is a hard enough pose for a lot of people. But if we look around the room and there's people struggling in down dog, I'm not going to be teaching handstand. I'm not going to be teaching wheel. I'm going to really make sure that that group is comfortable and has developed the strength and the flexibility they need to move into some of these other poses. For example, if I'm not really feeling mobility in a bridge pose, if I'm on my spine instead of on my scapula and shoulder blades in a bridge pose, I'm not going to come into shoulder stands. I'm going to just be rolling around on the back of my neck, which is going to be, and that's a whole nother, we can talk about that more if you like. It's something we go into depth in the SAFE training. All right, I've been talking for a while, so I want to make sure and open up some time for questions, and also give you a chance to just learn a little bit more about the SAFE program. SAFE is a program I've been developing over 6 years with 2 other partners. It's 20 chapters, 20 quizzes, 100-question exam that goes over a lot of these kinds of things we've been talking about. There's like 60+ videos, tons of really great illustrations. It's a really amazing program. I'm super proud of it. And it takes about 20 hours, self-paced. You have to pass a quiz for each chapter before you move on to the next chapter, and qualifies with most organizations for 20 continuing education hours. And we are also offering a discount for all of you. If you purchase within 7 days, you get 40% off. If anybody here is a studio owner or runs a yoga school, we're offering just the SAFE training for just $98, which is 20 hours of CEs, which is an amazing deal. Let me share my screen again. And, you know, we're going to send you this information, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this. I want to have time for you to ask your questions. So I'm going to just move on here. You know, why, I think I shared with you a little bit why I developed SAFE. It was as a yoga teacher trainer, I have advanced teacher training, and I have, you know, the basic 200-hour teacher training. And I was seeing people coming in from 200-hour trainings who had really no training in biomechanics. And now Yoga Alliance is requiring 20 hours of training in biomechanics, which is really amazing. But for many of us, that wasn't a requirement and it wasn't covered in our training at all. So we have spent, thousands of hours on this program, bringing in research and expertise and, to offer you all some good education. This is the other thing that I think is really important is when people get injured in yoga, they oftentimes do not report the injury. I know this because I used to travel a lot training teachers, and I would go through the airport with a yoga mat and someone would come up to me, oh, you practice yoga? We're just small talking in the airport. I'm like, yeah. And oh, I tried it. I hurt my knee the first time and never went back. I hurt my shoulder and never went back. I heard this all the time. Or they say, oh, it's just too hot. And I'm like, well, there's lots of kinds of yoga, and I know you can find a teacher that can help you to progress with the right range of motion and load so that you aren't injuring yourself right away when you come into yoga. And for me, yoga has given me so much from a psychological, transformational, spiritual perspective that it made me just really sad to know that people would come to a class, get injured, and never come back because they never got to the point where they got to realize the transformational benefits because they were injured so early in their practice. So that's kind of where the passion of this program came. And also as a yoga studio owner, I was finding that we live in a destination resort town. So people would come into town, move into town, and they'd be like, oh, I'm a yoga teacher. And I would know they have like great energy and they had really good training, but they had no biomechanics training. So they would come to want to teach at our studio. And because they didn't have any of that training, our students were so well educated because of the level of biomechanics that I taught the teachers that were there, that these new teachers, they'd be like, well, why did they do that? I know that doesn't feel good on my body and you all don't do that. So it would put me in a little bit of an odd situation because I don't want to tell this teacher who's got all this good training and really good presence and is a really good teacher that they don't have enough, right? So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to just create this program and all the teachers at my studio need to be SAFE certified. So it's been a really good way to kind of give us some consistency, but still allow us all to be our own unique teachers in that way. And it has helped create an amazing community. People will come to our studio and they'll be like, I don't know what's different, but I just feel safe in these classes. And they just feel like, even though all the teachers are different, there's this sense of consistency that happens. So this kind of covers a lot of what I just said about that. We also have a directory on the SAFE website about finding SAFE trained teachers. And this is a discount code for yoga and movement teachers that expires in 10 days. Oh, good. And then also if you're a studio owner or you have a yoga school, how to take advantage of that really low price and learn more about how we can help you get all of your teachers or trainees SAFE certified. Yeah, so I'm going to stop sharing this. You'll get this from Michelle later and open it up to some good questions. So let me check the chat, see if anybody has any questions. Does anybody have any specific pose questions or questions about anything that I taught so far? Are they able to unmute themselves if they need to? Or you can put it in the chat too if you want.
Yeah, and you can unmute. Mm-hmm. I really like what you said about the modifications, not calling it a modification, because I think, it's, people have an idea in their head about, well, I know I do, about yoga and like what you should be doing, but, not everybody can do that. And maybe to get there, you do need more support and you want to do it right. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, one of the things I say is I use the word options instead of modifications. And I always say options are only options and no one option is better than any other option.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes, this is another thing I haven't mentioned yet. When you continue, some of you probably already have a lot of training in this area, but if you don't have a lot of training in this area, one thing that this kind of training has helped me with is I can describe to people the benefits of different options. So if I want to focus on flexibility, I might give myself more support in a lunge and really relax with gravity into that, right? So it's not like it's less than, it's just an option toward flexibility. So I can sync with gravity, come into a passive stretch in a lunge, like just really relax. And if I want to focus on flexibility, if I want to focus on strength, I'm going to remove some of that support, deciding how much strength I want to focus on, right? If I want to focus on kind of balance, somewhere between strength and flexibility, and incorporating balance, I can come high. So really talking about our options from what is the benefit of that option? Not, what is the lesser, no value to the options, but what is the benefit of those different options? I think that's really, really important. It helps people feel like they get to choose, which is also trauma informed, that they get to choose, and they're choosing based on how you're educating them of the benefits of the different choices and options. Yeah. All right, so another question. How can you safely teach forward fours like Paschimottanasana? Yo, gosh, yes. So very good question. And I think, Caroline, you also mentioned that you teach to people with osteoporosis, right? Let's check that. Yeah. So that's a very good question. So forward folds. The most dangerous of the forward folds in terms of people who have osteoporosis or who have, and really, of course, with any of these conditions, they need to have their doctors or therapists' permission to practice yoga. As long as they have that, then we need to think about how, and we'll go back to these 5 principles. How can we teach a forward fold with less range of motion and with less load? So standing is going to be the most risky, right? And so a standing forward fold, it would need a lot of support, right? We would need to have forearms on the thighs, probably that might even be too much. But a seated forward fold, we can teach with some props if you have props, or we can go back to those 5 principles and decrease the range of motion and the load. So let me think what props I have here in my room. So a bolster, a pillow, a blanket, a rolled up mat could go underneath the knees, and you could sit on one. You can also sit on blocks. I also actually love to teach this lying on the back the length of the wall, which isn't seated forward fold, but it's the same shape, right? So if I come into Dandasana, this is the same shape as if I lay on my back and put my legs up the wall, which is going to give my spine tons of support. So the safest way to teach forward folds is on your back. And that's usually where I have, I spend more time on the back for people who have conditions like osteopenia or osteoporosis, so that I'm not loading the spine. I'm actually giving the spine space to create space between the vertebra. If I was doing a seated forward fold, I would provide some support. The other way we can support is not just with the under the knees and the hips, but you can even bring your hands to your sides for more support. So now I've created a lot of stability and support, so I can sit up as tall as I comfortably can. Now, for people who have osteopenia, osteoporosis, this is going to be a lot of postural work, and it's going to allow them to take deep breaths. If they don't feel a stretch in the back of their legs, then they could walk the heart a little forward, but we want to make sure that they don't end up rounding their backs. So wherever they can come forward without rounding the back is going to be important. The other thing that's really important that I recently learned is when we are practicing deep diaphragmatic, like a Ujjayi breath that's soft, or a whole complete breath. Samavriti pranayama, which is that whole complete breath on the inhale and the exhale. When we inhale using our diaphragm, we decompress our spine. So people who have osteoporosis, osteopenia, usually have struggled to take full deep breaths. And one of the problems down the road with osteoporosis and osteopenia is pneumonia. Is actually that the lungs and the heart, because of the flexion of the spine, start to not be able to function well. A lot of people who die of osteoporosis are dying because of pneumonia. They can't clear their lungs. So we really just want to focus on length and deep breath. So this, or even hands could be here, wherever you feel the best support. Sometimes with people who are really tight, so they're kind of here. I have a lot of men who, excuse me, honestly, they can't come forward without rounding your back. So I have them bring their hands behind them. Yeah, so I usually will cue hands behind or hands in front. And then of course they could bend their knees more, which would release the hamstrings. The hamstrings attached to the tibia and the pelvis. So when you bend the knees, you're able to move the pelvis into more of an anterior pelvic tilt, which is going to help those people who have flexion in the spine and a kyphotic upper back to become taller in the back. So all of those options are really good for anybody who has a hard time sitting up tall, but especially the deep diaphragmatic breath. Every time you inhale, you're decompressing the spine and creating space between the vertebrae. So one of the best things you can do is to have somebody lie on their back with support and just practice really deep breath into the lower part of their back ribs, feeling their diaphragm, that umbrella-shaped muscle at the base of the rib cage, expand and contract to decompress the spine. Yeah, good question. I love answering these questions. So if you have any others, I'm happy to.
I just have a follow-up with that. Thank you. That's really helpful. This is Carolyn. What would you think about using a strap around the balls of their feet? Is that dangerous or is that helpful?
Yeah, it kind of depends, because pulling ourselves forward isn't necessarily, I mean, the only real benefit with that strap, well, okay, the strap could be a good external support if we're not rounding our back or if we're not coming out of alignment with the strap. So to use that strap, you're going to do a couple of positive things. You're going to be strengthening the biceps. You're going to be strengthening your back muscles a little bit by pulling your heart forward. If it helps you to sit up tall, that's great. But what I see a lot of times is people will get the strap and they'll really like struggle to come into an intense stretch and they'll lose that deep diaphragmatic breath. So I would say as long as the strap is allowing them to continue to take whole, complete, relaxed breaths, this is so key to keeping the back healthy. And they're just using it to stabilize, I think that's totally fine, but just really watch and see what happens to their backs and where they're pulling from. If they're like this pulling, it's not helping them, right? So if they're going to be, pulling like this, if they're able to bend the elbows, give themselves some more room, and use the strap to just focus more on sitting tall and coming forward with a neutral spine, then they're going to be, one, strengthening the biceps, and two, stretching across the back of the body. And it might actually help them to sit up taller. The main thing we want to focus on, especially with the population you're working with, is length in the spine, not how far they come forward.
Okay, that's really helpful. I have another question, as long as no one else does. And it's similar, but the opposite way. What cues would you use to safely teach a back bend like Cobra?
Yeah. So the main thing that I think is really important when we talk about back bends is going back to this idea of lumbar stability and thoracic mobility. So remember, our thoracic spine is where the spine attaches to the ribs. So when we're coming into any back bend, we want to think about stabilizing the lumbar by using our transverse abdominis and our low core, and to move less from here and more from up here. But to move from the thoracic spine, we have to be strong in our backs. So first of all, we stabilize here, and then we're going to take the shoulder blades together and down the back. So I oftentimes will teach what I call strong camel, where we just come up tall on our knees, really activate our core, and take the shoulder blades together and down the back and reach the heart forward. So this is a really great place to start for people that are struggling with back bends. A lot of people will right away come here and then sink into their low back, but we really want to create the strength in our upper back to be able to move more from our upper back, our thoracic spine. Now, when we come to like a Cobra pose, we can similarly think about that. So if we're on our belly, I usually will start people taking their arms into a V, and then with their forehead down, I'm gonna keep my head lifted so you can hear me, but usually I'll have their forehead down. And we're gonna slide the elbows back and really focus on those shoulder blades in that upper back. Those shoulder blades come together and down the back, elbows reach back like cricket legs, okay? And then give them the option to maybe just lift their head and their heart without lifting, not without coming into like a locust or something, but just a heart opening cobra here, where the upper back is really strong. And if they have any discomfort, if they're extension sensitive in their low back and they have any discomfort, lift the belly. So lift that low belly like they're making space for a little raspberry underneath their belly button. And to really activate, again, lumbar stability, thoracic mobility. When it comes to twists and when it comes to back bends, you want to think lumbar stability, thoracic mobility, and really focus on mobilizing more from the thoracic spine and less from the lumbar spine for those poses. And that will really help everyone in your classes be more safe.
That's great. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. Any other questions?
I have another one if no one
Yeah.
else does, and
That's
it
fine.
has to do with mobility of the cervical spine. What would you recommend as far as trying to promote mobility or flexibility of the cervical spine?
I'm really glad you asked this question. Couple things to think about when it comes to cervical spine. Again, the cervical spine tends to be already pretty mobile in extension. And most of us tend to have a bit of forward head syndrome, meaning that we hold our head forward of the rest of our spine, right? And that causes all kinds of pain and discomfort in people's bodies. So couple things to think about there is just to notice in your poses, are you letting your head stay aligned with your spine? So oftentimes I see people lead their practice with, this is going to sound funny, but with their neocortical brain, like the front of their forehead, their thinking, their reasoning part, which is this brain that we use so much of our day. So like they're moving through their poses, but they're moving more from their brain and less from their body, if that makes sense. So for example, we're in, say, a Ardha Uttanasana, and I'll cue people lift your heart, and I'll see this happen. They just lift their head, they don't lift their heart, right? So when I come into a pose like this, and I'm asked to lift my heart, keeping the head aligned with the spine is really important. Now, in terms of releasing tension in the neck, there's a couple ways that I found that really work well. First of all, we don't want to create tension by, letting the head come out of alignment, really like struggling to look in certain directions and poses. But if in terms of releasing tension, if it's comfortable for you, if your neck isn't too incredibly tight, in a supported forward fold, so either forearms on the thighs or ribs on the thighs, letting the head really hang with gravity. There's lots of freedom in the head, the neck, the shoulders. Even for me, even turning the palms up releases my shoulders. And then letting the head very gently move into a yes and a no early on in the practice helps to release some of that chronic tension that people deal with. So that's a really good one. I also really love gentle movement in the neck. It can be really effective. We want to make sure when we stretch the neck that we don't stretch it too deeply. I'll show you that in a moment as well. But another one I like in terms of gentle release is to come on the back and just let your head rock side to side. You're going to be massaging the fascia in the back of your skull, releasing tension in the neck, kind of noticing what your pain-free range of motion with all of this support. You have so much support for your head, right? So it can be a really nice way to release any tension. My husband has such a tense neck right now, that when he does that, this is something I noticed in my students. Like if he just rocks his head, his whole body rocks. That's how connected his neck tension is into his upper back and down into his shoulders. So please know that a lot of neck tension comes from stress, postural stress, that forward head syndrome. He's a shop teacher in a high school, so he does a lot of, and he's tall, so he does a lot of leaning over throughout the day. So he's working on that, like hinging from his hips instead of rounding from his head. One way that I really like to stretch the neck is, again, just letting gravity do it, not pulling on the head. And I'll go into it like a deer pose. So this is a deer pose. I'll take this hand and hold the ankle, and this arm I'm going to really, really relax. I even sometimes have people just kind of shake it out, turn the palm up, and then I'm going to let the head just fall away from the anchor point here on the ankle through a pain-free range of motion, letting the gravity of the head, the weight of the head, stretch into all of these muscles down into the shoulder, the side of the head and neck. And then, if you want to go into more of the back of the neck muscles, you just drop your chin a little bit. And then if you want to go into more of the front of the neck muscles, you can lift your chin a little bit. One thing that's really important here, and I usually hold this for a lot longer than this. One thing that's really important is when you come out, if you've held this for a good minute or two, you have lengthened these muscles a lot. So you want to come out really slowly, so the muscles can kind of like, okay, this is a new position in the body. I've got all this length that I'm not used to. And then of course we do the other side, but people really love this one. Another favorite of mine is a back bend that also brings a little bit of fascial release into the upper back. And again, a lot of that neck tension is from upper back tension. So I call this a fascial releasing fish. We could take a block, and for people who, I don't know that I would do this with people who have osteoporosis, probably not. It's probably too much, but you would continue to see where they're at. But medium setting or low setting for somebody who would be newer to this. And again, this is a cork block. A foam block would feel better. You place that block right at the middle of your shoulder blades. The middle of your shoulder blades is directly behind your heart, T8 of your thoracic vertebra, okay? And then you place your hands to create a net or a hammock, and you let the weight of your head fall into your hands, and this is gonna help open up your thoracic spine. And then what I'll do is I'll have people exhale and lift the elbows and stretch across the back of the neck, and then inhale and open back up into this. Through their pain-free range of motion. Now, if you're taking care of shoulders, the elbows might be up, but we exhale, and then we inhale. And another nice option is once you're here, to side bend, which then starts to sort of use the block to fascially release some of the tension that people hold in the upper back. And the upper back muscles fascially connect with the levator scapulae, which is one of the back neck muscles that gets really tight in people, and the upper traps. There's all this fascial connection there. So by kind of moving, in and out of that and side bending into it, you're sort of fascia releasing a lot of that upper back tension, which can relate to the neck tension. So those are just some of the ideas that I have that people really love to release neck pain. Actually, we have time for one more. I have one more idea, and then we'll close. On your side, so many of us learn spinal twist moving from our legs. And actually I've learned, and this is really important, that if you move into a spinal twist from your legs, you're going to emphasize your lumbar spine more. This is kind of a question based on what we talked about so far. Do we want to move our twist more from our lumbar or thoracic? Thoracic. So if I'm coming into a spinal twist from my legs, I'm going to be emphasizing my lumbar more. So instead, I teach people spinal twists from their upper body. So we go on our side. Hopefully you can see me a little bit here. And then we move from the upper body. This is really nice for releasing tension in the neck too, because all of these muscles in the chest, the upper back, and the shoulder that contribute to neck tightness get to stretch. And I move my gaze with my hand. So my neck is moving with the rest of my body from the waist up. And I'm emphasizing the twist from the thoracic spine instead of the lumbar spine.
Hmm.
Those
So
are all
interesting.
really yummy. Whenever I get tension in my neck, I just do that little sequence that I just showed you.
Makes me want to take a yoga class.
Yay! Yeah, I teach live streaming and via recording Fridays at noon.
Oh,
Slow flow, noon Pacific time. So
okay.
if you ever want to jump in on a class, I didn't mention this in any of the handouts. I just talked about the SAFE training, but if you do want to take a class with me, I have a lot of people that attend live streaming Fridays noon to 1. Our website for signing up for those classes is flow, FLOW, hoodriver.com, flowhoodriver.com. And yeah, you can take a live streaming class, or if you can't attend at that time, if you just sign up for the online version, I always send a recording out. And I do a lot of these kinds of, I think that it's a great class. I have a lot of yoga teachers that attend because I emphasize a lot of language around inclusivity and accessibility and some of these ideas. I'd love
That's
to have
great.
too.
Yeah, I would love to do that.
Yeah. I
This
do
is
have to tell you though, that I will be teaching this Friday and then I will be out for a month.
Oh, okay.
Having a surgery, a pretty major surgery on Friday, May 12th. So if you do want to attend, I mean, the other teachers are great too, but I will be out for a month after.
Okay.
Yeah. So come, if you can't come this Friday, come in June and join me.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, this is just really, really great information. And I can see why this is really important, you know, for someone to think about and to add to their practice, but also from like a participant, it's kind of really, really reassuring to know that somebody knows what, you know, or is thinking about these things while they're teaching me, you know, so that I think it's really great work. And thank you for putting this together and being here today and sharing this. And I'll put this in the Facebook group, and I'll also follow up with an email to everybody with the recording and the presentation, and also Stephanie's offer to AB members as well. So for the 40% off for the next 10 days. So yeah.
Awesome.
So,
Thank you so much, Michelle. This was so much fun.
thank you. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.